I was thinking when you were talking about Zachor and Shamor and the Edut, that it really works perhaps in a parallel manner, that in a sense Hashem is always remembers us, and he also he preserves his covenant with us over the generations, and he remembers us, and we at the same time are remembering what he's giving us and preserving the tradition that he's given us. The part that connects to our part of that, of the Shamor and Nachor, is connects to the preservation of the Torah scrolls as they've come down through the generations.
Yeah, that makes me think of a related point, which is that there are these verbs that we think of in the Torah as being very mental, like remembering, and lots of other ones as well, that somehow their primary meaning seems to be psychological. Where in the Lashon of the Torah, it's always, and also in Halakha, etc., that there's always this sense of they actually have to have an accompanying action, right? Like knowing something can't be something that you just do by sitting and cognizing. That when someone in the Torah says Ata Yadati, like now I know, what they mean is now I know because some fact has been accomplished, some action has been taken, and there is no substitute for the knowledge of experience, and I have just experienced the thing that's happened. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Malach says to Avraham after the Akedah, after the binding of Isaac, Ata yadati ki yarei Elohim ata. Now I know that you fear God. It wasn't the case that Hashem didn't know what emotions or attitudes Avraham had beforehand. It's that there's no such thing as yidiyah of knowledge without a kind of a carnal aspect, a physically instantiated aspect. And the physically instantiated aspect of Avraham's Yirat Elohim was that he did this. And now that he did it, there's something for Hashem to know that couldn't be known before. And similarly with the verb of Zachor, like remembering Shabbat. When we remember Shabbat, what do? We make Kiddush, right? So you can't just say, oh, yes, I remember Shabbat. I thought about it and I remembered the number 7 or something. You have to perform actions. You make a bracha, you drink wine, you talk about things while doing things. And that's how we actually remember things. So remembrance is this very active process that we do with our hands as well as our brains in Halakha and in Torah. And that, I think, getting back to what you're saying with the idea of Hashem remembering us, that also is very much the case in Sefer Shemot, right? V'zacharti et briti, like when Hashem says, I will remember my covenant. The point is that we're not saying he forgot previously, like, oh, he was distracted, so to speak, chas v'shalom, and it slipped his mind that he had made this promise. We wouldn't say that, because we would say, rather, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is never less aware of all the things that he knows, but if he's not remembering something yet in the Lashon of the Torah, it's because he's not currently doing the thing about it that shows that he remembers, right? That it's about our seeing him remembering. So when he says, and I will remember a brit, right? He's saying, like, now you will see that I remember this brit, because we're going to see a whole bunch of things happening in Mitzrayim that show that I'm here and I remember what I promised, because I'm fulfilling that promise. And so I think that I'm agreeing with your observation that there's this sort of parallel between, we have this job of zichira, of remembering, or zikaron, all those different memory activities, but also HaKadosh Baruch Hu fulfills his side of the bargain with remembering us. And in both cases, it's really about actions that ultimately fulfill a promise. And in his case, that promise would be to preserve us, among other things, right? Like the sort of the shmirah part, that we are frail, finite number of human beings, and it seems like that means that Am Yisrael could just by chance kind of disappear, chas v'shalom, from the universe one day, just because like too many accidents happened on the same day. But the promise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that he always remembers us enough that he will preserve us and will preserve amongst us enough of our tradition that we have the opportunity to fulfill our responsibilities to him and continue to earn that shmirah.
Yeah, I think maybe another way of putting what I was trying to say is that if we're talking about the validity, if we want to use the word in reference to the Torah we have in our hands today, well, Hashem is remembering. His remembering is the reference point is to the Torah scroll we have, and our remembering is the same thing. So in a sense, we're both remembering the same thing, and sort of propping up in a certain sense that Torah scroll we have as being valid.
Yeah, and I think that this is a very delicate issue, because I wouldn't say that we learn nothing at all from archaeology about how to keep the Torah. But we do have to be very careful about that, because at some level, if a very sort of absurd philosophical skeptic wanted to say, what if the word kevis actually means iguana, but you just all forgot that? And at some point there was this big sort of mistake in transmission that happened 1700 years ago, and all the people who knew that kevis meant iguana died out, and there was a sect of heretics who thought it meant sheep, and they were the ones who survived. And now like everyone thinks that we're supposed to be sacrificing sheep on Har HaBayit when really it should be iguanas. If someone wanted to make that kind of an absurdist skeptical proposal, the answer to that, I think, is never going to be, no, we've looked carefully at this issue and we are 100% certain of everything that happened in the past, and now we're not worried about that anymore. There always is uncertainty about what happened in the past. So you need an attitude about how to do the right thing in terms of halakha that is insulated against that kind of a critique. And I think the way that it works is to say, lo b'shamayim, the Torah is not up in heaven. It's not something that is written down perfectly up in heaven, and we hope that our copy matches it. We have the copy of the Torah here on earth that we're working with, and we always have to work with what we currently have. So in the most recent version of this discussion, I've been fascinated by the mitzvah of Techelet in tzitzit, right? Because we have these threads in tzitzit that are dyed to be azure or blue instead of the white ones, and the blue ones or the azure ones, the Techelet ones, you need to dye them according to a specific procedure of extraction of a dye from a particular mollusk. And as we know, the knowledge of what mollusk that was lost for a long time to religious Jews, because most religious Jews were not living in a part of the world where they had access to that ecosystem where they could find the mollusk and use it, the chilazon. And that's knowledge that's been rediscovered in the present era, now that we've returned to the land. And it raises the question, well, how sure are you? Was it this mollusk or was it another one? Maybe you found a mollusk that just has enough properties that resemble that of the mollusk, the chilazon that was described by Chazal. But since you never can really be totally sure, maybe you shouldn't be wearing Techelet, and we never can rediscover that. And what I'm so struck by is that the Torah itself anticipates this conversation, because what do we say about the tzitzit? In Kriyat Shema, we read, והיה לכם הציצית, ראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם. So you look at the tzitzit and you see them, and you remember all the mitzvot of Hashem and you do them. That the tzitzit are anticipated as an instance where there's a kind of technical knowledge that could be partly lost and also regained. And that's how we should be relating to all the mitzvot of the Torah, right? That the Torah is not something where we say, well, because we no longer have certain kinds of knowledge for 100% certain that exactly line up with what they were doing in the time of Shlomo HaMelech, let's say, we therefore can't do these things ever again until essentially some kind of otherworldly end of days scenario. Because that is a kind of argument that's not just made about tzitzit and about Techelet, but really about a broad swath of things to do with the Mikdash, right? That there's too much lost knowledge, and therefore we can't bring it back to life because there's no trustworthy way of regaining that knowledge when the chain of tradition has been broken. But I think tzitzit lights the way, and the Torah teaches us that tzitzit lights the way, that we can remember all the mitzvot of Hashem because lo b'shamayim, because zichira is not just, oh, I had forgotten, but now I remember that, this is how you do this, or this is how you do that. That it's about remembrance through action, and it's about in some cases a sort of a rediscovery or a return of attention to something that seemed to have been forgotten, which also is the case when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was talking about remembering his brit, because for centuries of slavery in Mitzrayim, Bnei Israel must have felt like he had not remembered and that he had forgotten.
But I was inspired while I was listening to what you were saying about Techelet, because what came to mind is what we see very often nowadays is a very high correlation between the people who wear Techelet and go up to the Temple Mount. Mm-hmm. And I see there's a conceptual parallel beyond of what I might have thought about in the past, which is that process of rediscovery that you were just talking about, that the Techelet was rediscovered, and we had the belief that we could rediscover it, and that it is something that can be done, and we did it. The same thing ultimately is going to happen regarding the Temple Mount, where that which some might assume either never existed or would never come back is going to be rediscovered as a result of our efforts, both in thought and in action.
Yeah, and I think the point is that when that happens, B'ezrat Hashem, as long as we are being careful and scholarly and doing the best job we possibly can at understanding the requirements of the Torah, and I think Bar-Hayim obviously is a great leader in that kind of a pursuit, where we have to take it all very seriously and go to all the sources and do the best that we possibly can to understand what we're being taught. But once we do that, I'm not worried that the result that we come up with when we finally decide, okay, this is what we have, so let's do it, is going to be, in fact, not correct, because it's not the way that they actually did it in the time of Rabbi Akiva, or in the time of Shlomo HaMelech, or in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Because again, lo b'shamayim hi, and what we end up doing, if we do it with the right kavanah, and if we do it l'shem shamayim, and if we do it with the vast resources of Torah and Talmud that we have to study, that will be the way to do it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu intends us to do it. And in a sense, it's an irrelevant question, and an epistemologically almost meaningless one, to imagine a world we cannot access that is eons ago, and of which we have very little material evidence, to imagine that there's a perfect and correct way of it being done that we either are matching or are not matching. And since we can never know that we're matching it perfectly, then we shouldn't do something. I would rather say instead, lo b'shamayim hi, and uzachartem et kol mitzvot Adonai va'asitem otam. You should remember all the mitzvot of Hashem and do them. And that just like with Techelet, we can do that with all the other mitzvot. And that when we're doing them with the right kavanah and with study and with care and intention, we will be doing them the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu intends us to do them, the same way we're reading the letters of the Torah that he wrote with his hand, the way that he intended, regardless of whatever process and girsot or whatever else and copying happened over the eons.
I was also thinking of another idea. I'm not exactly sure if this is a correct idea, that the type of question and answer process that happened with the Benot Tzalafchad and other cases which you mentioned, that in a sense, perhaps it can be seen as a type of quasi, quote unquote, Torah Sheba'al Peh, which then became Torah Shebechtav, and there's a message there, which is also contained within Yitro, which talks about the Sanhedrin and the Batei Din. We know that the Rambam says that the focal point of the Torah Sheba'al Peh is the decisions of the Sanhedrin. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, maybe it all ties together, that these examples of quasi Torah Sheba'al Peh that you cited could be seen as leading the way, so to speak, and showing that ultimately there'll be a certain type of question and answer process via the Batei Din, which also is a source of Torah.
Yeah, no, I think it is interesting to wonder whether, in the case of Benot Tzalafchad, we're kind of being shown what it could be like to have, like you say, Torah Sheba'al Peh be generated by a judicial process. But I do think part of the point there is that the problem is, as long as Moshe Rabbeinu is in the picture, you have this issue where it isn't just, he isn't quote unquote just Chazal who have an opinion that gets recorded, where Shmuel says one thing and Rava says another. He's Moshe Rabbeinu. So if you got in front of the boss, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the boss, but if you via Moshe get to really bring it directly before him, and you still have that working process, then you have written another line in the Torah, and that's. I think I noticed that also because at the moment where Kadosh Baruch Hu is telling Moshe that he can't go into the land, this might also be in Shavet Hanan. The same verb that's used to say about the Torah itself, don't add to the Torah, like leosif, is also used where Hashem is saying to Moshe, like, enough, stop asking to go into the land. Right.
It's actually very fascinating, and I don't know if I ever thought of that, but I think you're touching on something extremely fascinating, which is that on some level, if Moshe Rabbeinu had not died when he died, then in a sense there'd be some type of confusion. When does the Torah Shebechtav end? Mm-hmm. When does the Torah end? In other words, is it continuing onwards because now you're coming into Eretz Yisrael, or at some point there has to be a demarcation, and this was the demarcation that was deemed correct.
Yeah, and there were other elements of that demarcation, right? Because it was also an end to the man, like the food that they ate in the midbar. The midbar was this kind of operating system level existence that is otherworldly, right? Where you get water from a rock and you get man, and Moshe and Ohel Moed are right there, and everything is bare bones. Direct relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and an existence in this world that is almost lifted right out of it because of how not constrained by the usual material constraints of this world it is. And all of that comes to an end as they're going into the land, right? That they stop eating the man, they stop getting water and I mean, we all know that there's this association between Moshe being told he can't go into the land and the fact that he's still giving them water out of a rock. And obviously that's a complicated episode in its own right. But yeah, I think that the idea that you can bring questions directly before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and just get a straight answer and then say, well, now that we have our answer, that's more Luchot HaBrit, so to speak, handed to us from Hashem, that there's something that's clearly dangerous and ultimately not healthy about that. And I think that the ultimate engagement with that issue that is you famously see in the Gemara, where this pasuk of Lo B'Shamayim is being quoted in this argument about the kashrut of an oven, where is it Hurkanos, Ben Hurkanos? There are different sages who are arguing, and one of them is sort of asking for all of these miracles and heavenly voices to agree with him. And the point is that he gets all of the miracles, the walls to shake and heavenly voice and everything, and yet it's still the case that halacha goes with the other guy because lo b'shamayim hi, and that's where we have HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying nitzchoni banai, like my sons have defeated me. That there's Hashem doesn't want to just tell us what to do, and on a moment by moment basis, like someone who very naively has the kavanah of an Oved Hashem, where he says, I just want to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to do. So what I'd really like is just to be able to check every 30 milliseconds if I'm doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to do, and I'll get the direct instruction and I'll do that. Wanting to just sort of be a robot or a marionette where Hashem makes you do what you want, or rather what he wants, that desire on the part of a naive Oved Hashem is misplaced. That's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. That's not real Avodat Hashem. Avodat Hashem, of the kind that HaKadosh Baruch Hu clearly desires, is much more difficult than that, because what it requires is being individuals who are capable of mistakes and capable of incorrect apprehensions and capable of being drawn in different directions by desires, figure out how to understand enough about what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants by studying the Torah, that they can then consciously choose to do what they think he wants and get it right sometimes, and then get it right more and more and more as time goes on, because they're getting better at it. Clearly, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants that from us, and the problem is that that's a very sort of error-prone situation. But he doesn't want us instead to just be, in a sense, unconscious materials or blind marionettes that just sort of twitch in whatever direction he makes us twitch in, and then calls that the success of service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That would be successful service of Paro, to only do, with each little fractional motion of a finger, like exactly what Paro wants. What Hashem is trying to do is trying to show how serving him involves this kind of radical freedom, where successful service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu must involve this free choice to figure out how to understand and know and love him and fear him in the right way, so that you get it right. And so again, this thing with Moshe going into the land and like continually making new rulings to tell people, you can't do this. The doorway in your house should be this much taller because I asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he told me. That kind of rigid constraint and that kind of blind obedience is not what Hashem is going for, seemingly.
Also, the robotic, that type of robotic situation would also militate against the whole purpose of the world, which is to have Hashem's glory in a physical world, not just in some angelic world where everything is done automatically, the second Hashem says to, in that type of robotic manner that you're saying that it, in other words, the combination of here physical world with free choice melds better with the type of situation which emerged, as opposed to the situation that would have existed had things developed differently.
Mhm.
Is the oven of Achnai.
Okay, yeah. But Ben Horkonos is one of the people arguing, right? I think Achnai is the name of the owner.
Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkonos is one of the yeah. And the Nasi Rabban Gamliel was arguing
that's right.
that the oven was impure.
Mhm.
In any case, I want to encourage any viewers who found this conversation and these hearing as fascinating as I find them to be, to submit questions. You can submit questions or suggestions for future shiurim in the comment section, and just maybe we'll touch on some of those things in the future. Hey, thank you very much, Dr. England.
Thank you. Good night.
Hey, good night.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.